Hi, my name is Sonny. I'm the COO of ABC Florida East Coast Chapter. I want to welcome you to episode 12 of the Obvious Podcast. It is also our very special election edition.
I'm Peter Daiga. I'm the president and CEO of ABC Florida East Coast Chapter. So,
the Obvious Podcast is a production of ABC Florida East Coast. Unless otherwise stated, all content reflects the opinions of the guests and the hosts, which is us. If you like the Obvious Podcast, you can subscribe to it on all of the major podcast platforms, such as Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, or Spotify, amongst others. Or you can watch the audio version on YouTube. You can also follow the Obvious Podcast on Instagram and Twitter. You can always reach out to us via email at theobvious@abceastflorida.com. Links to all of the social media feeds are in this episode show notes. If you want to help others find the podcast, please leave us a review on the podcast platform of your choice. As you can see, Peter and I are joining you today from Zoom because we're in two different locations. For the last 2 days, we've been very busy with the ABC board retreat, which was a huge success. I also wanted to talk to you, Peter, because so much has happened since we last were on the Obvious. And obviously the elections have happened. You know, the results have been astounding to many, many people. But a few weeks before the election, you and I had a conversation. You predicted the outcome of this election with a lot of confidence and with a lot of accuracy. And I am really curious to know what led you to believe what led you to believe what happened that actually did happen.
Well, Sonny, my background. I graduated from the University of Florida with a degree in quantitative management. So statistics and data and those kind of things have always been super important to me. And a second love of my life, obviously, is politics. I was always involved in politics. Volunteered for campaigns at a very young age and worked my way up to paid campaigns. So the combination of those two things have always kind of led me to be a different student, if you will, of the data, behind campaigns and elections. So, I don't just consume the typical data and the polls and the stuff that you see on the mainstream legacy, whatever you want to call them, media. So you and I have had a lot of conversations about how, if I can't read those polls and they're telling me what their sample not only size was, but the distribution of their sample size. How many Democrats, how many Republicans were they? Because if you're not out making sure that you keep calling Republicans until you get the number of Republicans you need, then you have a worthless poll. So in any event, to make a long story short, I just for a lot of different reasons, I think this year people were ignoring something that happened a lot in the last 4 years, which was increased Republican registration and almost across the country. In states, in fact, in Florida, Republicans for the first time in our state's history out-registered Democrats. I think that occurred, sometime last year, I think, in 2023. But that was not just a trend in Florida. That was actually, I think it was exacerbated or accentuated in Florida because of a lot of the people moving here, because of the COVID and their frustration, I guess, with how their states handled COVID. We all know a lot of New Yorkers always moved to Florida, but even more so in the last, few years. And there was a big concern in political circles whether, that saying, don't New York our Florida, and Texas says don't California our Texas, and whatnot. But until that data started coming out, and there was another set of data that kind of gave a good indication too, which was it had to do with the driver's license registrations, and I forget exactly how they tied that into. But in any event, the proof in the pudding came when we saw the registration numbers actually for Republicans going up. So I think what people started to in Florida assume was it was the right of center people that were moving out of these states. They were frustrated. So it was making Florida more red and New York perhaps more blue, and this is a trend around the country. So that's one thing I don't think they were paying particular attention to. we know 4 years ago and practically every year that the polls usually, Republicans candidates usually outperform, the polls. And again, this boils down to who they're sampling, and are they taking a proper sample size, of Republicans and Democrats? So I got my neighbor. I just want to say hello.
Yeah.
Sorry, he's a guest attendee on the podcast. Say hey there.
Hi.
All right. So, a neighborhood kid who likes to come for his cookies and gummy bears. So, yeah, I think that was.
So I have another question for you. I saw this on my social media today, and it really was fascinating to me because the poster basically asks, "Are the polls wrong, or are they lying?" And I specifically, when I read that question, I specifically thought of just the day or two before the election, the Iowa poll, right, which Trump was down 10 points, and everybody was like, "What? This is an outlier. This is this." But the person who took the poll apparently has a good reputation for accuracy. There was a lot of talk of the Iowa poll. There was a lot of talk of, and you wonder, like, are they just trying to suppress the vote? Are they trying to create a talking point? Are they trying to create talking points for commercials? And I just, because of your long history in politics, I'm really curious.
Yeah,
why you in that.
I mean, I think it's, there's probably a little bit of both going on, quite frankly. So, the other thing is, you got to differentiate between public polls that are made for public consumption. The media has a vested interest, and the campaigns, quite frankly, when it comes to public polls, in keeping the race close. It keeps interest for people watching the TV, and it keeps both sides, voters, motivated to turn out. So, what you got to really tune into, which again, this also kind of fed into the things that make me reach the conclusions I reached, which is all the campaigns also do internal polling, the polls that really are not made for public consumption. So they have a pretty good idea if they're ahead or behind, right? So, and so if you're listening to both campaigns as it leads up to the final days of the election, and you've got one campaign stating it's really close, well, that's what you got to say. You got to turn your people out. But you have another candidate at his rallies periodically saying, I'm not supposed to say this, but we're really up good. We're really up better than these polls. What is his motivation in saying that? I mean, he's really got no motivation. He would be, his interest would be better served by him doing what the other campaign did, which is say it's really close. It's really close.
Right.
So that, that kind of led me to believe their internal polling, was saying what my gut would say, which is these polls are undercounting, Republican voters. We've had a real large swing to Republican registration. There's what I forget what some people call it, I think ghost, or, the hidden Republican or Trump vote, because the news media and our society has made being a Trump supporter, something that you're not readily willing to admit. And
Very true.
Then you have people that tell, polling in general is getting more difficult because, especially in this race, people there's a right of center group that is just curmudgery, is that the word, or what, that just don't want to answer polls, so you call, you're like, get lost, So it's kind of
an issue. This has been an issue from Truman days. I remember in studying in history class, the Truman Dewey newspaper headline that the Chicago Tribune jumped the gun on and said Dewey wins.
That was great.
The whole poll on phones.
Yeah.
It's a famous picture. And Truman, when he won the election, is holding the newspaper up and it says Dewey wins.
Yeah.
And Dewey got clobbered and Truman won. And it's just fascinating to me that here we are, whatever that was, 70, 80, 90 years later, we're still struggling with that and trying to figure out how to even talk to people in a manner that is accurate. Yeah. So I have another question for you before, because we're running low on time and I want to make sure we cover everything we want to cover. I read today that Arizona has yet to count something like 700,000 ballots. And it kind of blew my mind, right? That there's 20 races, 30 races that have yet to be called. And there's Florida. Now, I moved to Florida when that whole debacle happened with the hanging Chad and Bush v. Gore. So I don't want to make it sound like we have this massive superiority complex about how we do elections. But I remember 2.5, 3 hours on election night. Florida was done. Every county had reported
10 and 11 million votes. So I think we gotta sufficiently shame those states. Because there really is no reason for that, and I think you're right. Florida doesn't exactly have an exemplary history with that, but we were sufficiently shamed, and we got our act together.
Yeah.
And we're a state now that, regardless of the county or what part of the state, we can get the results, and there's really no reason why you can't. So, but I think until we you notice it's a little different treatment, right? I mean, Florida was treated as a pariah and really was shamed, but
yeah,
I don't really see that or have that sense about it. There's some joking about it, but it really is shameful, and they should be ashamed, that they can't get this done. Quite frankly,
and the media is talking about it like it's perfectly normal. We're waiting like that, right?
And no, it's not normal, So
it's just fascinating to me.
Yeah.
So,
but Sonny, I just want to read. I did predict a pretty large red wave.
You did.
I think I even predicted 53 in the Senate.
You did? No, you predicted 54 in the Senate.
54? Okay.
I predicted 54.
So, which, we might still get there. To your point, a lot of people have written off Kari Lake, as this day, which is, by the way, day 3, and we still have our democracy. I just wanted to point that out. We still have our constitutional rights. I just wanted to point that out. Right. I might make that a recurring, theme or post of mine for the next, 1,400 days, or, whatever it is. Day 1,400, we still have our Constitution, we still have our democracy, but Kari Lake could still win Arizona. I mean, because they only have, 70 or 80% of the vote counted in large.
And it's a fast shrinking margin in her favor.
Yeah,
I read.
Yeah, so I think it's a little bit long shot, but it's possible. So,
do you think the Republicans will win the House?
I do. I think most of the stuff that I've seen is, because we know the ones that are undeclared, but we know where they're ahead. And again, counting ballots is a little bit of a science too. When you know what percent is left, well, where is that count coming from? If it's the day of votes, that it probably will tend to favor Republicans, especially outside of urban areas. In a lot of these more rural states, the urban areas are sometimes the quickest to get their tallies together, and it's the outlying counties that, So anyway,
I do want to say, you just said that counting ballots is the science. I do want to say that one of your favorite sayings is that's why it's called political science. And that's such a great point, because it is. I mean, they have it down. Most states have it down, and most campaigns have it down, but it's still just shocking to me how we're still waiting. And I mean, it's like, this is the United States of America, and we can't figure out who voted for who 3-4 days later.
Right. Yeah.
Now, so one more question I wanted to ask you was about, I know Trump made news by appointing a female chief of staff. I also read...
Odd for a guy that doesn't surround himself with strong intelligence.
That's right. I hope Mark Cuban is...
It's the first chief of staff ever to be appointed. So
first female chief of staff ever to be appointed. And I read an interesting piece today about a shoemaker named Steve Madden, who is cutting off half of their Chinese manufacturing.
Isn't that incredible?
Right?
This man hasn't even been inaugurated yet, and he's having an impact. So,
the Houthis in Yemen have said they want to make a peace deal. I know the Qataris are working on getting Hamas out of there. I mean, there's a lot of interesting things globally that are happening because of this election.
Absolutely. Finish your point about Madden and Madden shoes and what they've...
Oh, yeah. And, you just... Because I remember a lot of my friends on the left were very easily calling tariffs attacks, right? But then you also kind of think about, okay, if tariffs are attacks, where's the item going to be made? Because it's going to be made somewhere, right? So, and if the shoes are made, if the shoes are no longer made in China, and I don't know if they're going to come back to the U.S. or if they'll move to Vietnam or they'll move to a different country.
I think he announced he's moving 40% of it to the U.S. I thought,
right? So then
you're even inaugurated, right? You've got people announcing Kind of
moving back to the States, onshoring, right, as the economists like to say. And then you're looking at that, and you're like, okay, so there's going to be literally job creation. Obviously, he's not going to pay American workers what Chinese workers make in China, right? So they're going to be paid more.
Yeah.
So, yeah, the item is going to cost more if it's made here, but it's going to support American jobs and be of better quality, right? This disposable capitalism that everybody in the left bemoans exists because so much manufacturing is occurring offshore, right? So better quality manufacturing, at least that disposability, fast fashion, there's all these terms.
Yeah, and again, three days into the election, you got people already recalculating and making moves. And you mentioned, the Middle East. I think I had read today that Mexico officials had announced that they would intervene and stop the current caravan that's organized. Leadership matters, right? And these are the things he won on. So, by the way, if you checked your 401k in the last 3 days, it's incredible. I think stock markets, historic levels, and I don't know how long. You'd probably get better. It's unbelievable. So
yeah, it's. I read that it's the best week in the last 12 months for sure. In terms of those specific days, I think it's been record setting in terms of how gangbusters both the S&P 500 and the Dow Jones have done.
Anyway, it's awesome, and I know we're short on time, but I just wanted to drive home a few things. This truly is a huge victory.
Yep.
Even states that he lost by if 30 or 15 or 40,000 votes had switched, he would have won crazy states like New Hampshire and New Jersey, and Virginia was incredibly close.
Did you see the map of California from 2020 to now?
Yeah.
How many red counties there were, especially in the middle of the state,
and how it's changed in the last 4 years, and that's a good indication of how the House majority will, because that probably is going to impact some races, right? In counties in California before that were blue that are now red. So, but he and the real beauty of this is he won the popular vote, right, by almost 5 million votes. It's unbelievable. 76 million.
Now nobody's talking about getting rid of the Electoral College. That conversation has gone away.
No, I just read an article about that I think somebody had reached out to all the senators that had talked about doing that. They talked about doing away with the filibuster, packing the court, and now they're all like silent. They're like crickets. They're like, so. But Miami-Dade, went for the Republican candidate for the first time since 1986.
Yes, incredible.
Trump got 45% of all Latinos and 54% of Latino men.
Yeah,
but 45% overall, even including the women. 49 of 50 states, 49 of 50 moved to the right.
Wow.
In terms of the number of Republican votes versus Democrat votes. It doesn't mean they won them all.
Right.
But even in the Democrat states, they moved to the right in terms of total votes. 49 out of 50.
So anything I would add to that, ABC, Florida East Coast, endorsed, I think it was 47 or 48 candidates in this election cycle, and that's exclusive of Trump, who was endorsed by ABC National, ABC State, and ABC Florida East Coast, and that's exclusive of Rick Scott, who was endorsed by all three organizations as well. So 48, I think, candidates we endorsed. Only 3 of our endorsed candidates lost. Every single one won, except with the exception of 3 candidates. And I find that to be such a Peter, you have a history of saying this in our legislative meetings. ABC Florida East Coast doesn't endorse based on who we think is going to win, right? And so I think because of that, that's a very satisfying number to look at and to see, our help and our efforts. And I know we reached out and helped Corey Simon's campaign. I know we reached out and helped Vicky Lopez's campaign. And I know as an organization, we did a lot. And they both won their races, which is wonderful to see.
Yeah. And again, we were just kind of summarizing some of this data at our recent retreat. All of the ABC chapters and ABC of Florida combined in the last cycle, which the cycle, when we talk about election cycles, we're talking about a 2-year period, but this doesn't include ABC National, so this number is way north of this. But just the chapters and ABC of Florida combined in the last cycle spent about $800,000 in Florida.
Wow.
That's, money's not, obviously the entire story. I think what we do with independent campaign expenditures and mailers, I think what we do with educating people.
At least we didn't spend $1 billion and lose. So
Somebody did that. $1 billion. And by the way, they also, I think, were, what's the figure they're in? They overspent. They're in the red ink. Can you read? They're 20 million, I think, or 40 million, I heard.
Yeah, I read 40 million in the red.
40 million, yeah.
I don't know if that's accurate.
They run their campaigns the way they like to run the government. So
let's just spend the money first. Well, thank you very much for this time. I know you're traveling next week, so wishing you safe travels. And we're very grateful to you, our audience, for joining us. And feel free to reach out if you have any questions, any comments. Our email is theobvious@abceastflorida.com.
We're anxious to get to work, right, with this majorities in the different states and the U.S. House and Congress, and on behalf of the Merit Shop and the free markets, right? And I just want to say in closing, don't be surprised when the president pursues his campaign agenda. He's going to, and I know there'll be a lot of, ripping of, whatever, your hair shirts and, I don't know, whatever you do, say, throwing ashes on your head about, the agenda, but everybody knows what it was.
Right.
And that's what he's going to pursue. So,
unlike the other side, he didn't hide his agenda. So thank you for joining us, and we wish you a great day.
Sleep well.